Very happy to have you again. Thank you so much. About the balance in Islam, we know that we are a middle nation, so we'd like to understand this. Something like this was mentioned in the second chapter in the Quran. And also we'd like to understand that some people, they misunderstand that when something has a right, they give it too much right, while they don't have the balance. This is the second point. And the third point is it possible to have 100% balance within every single right that you have as a Muslim?
Alhamdulillah, Rasulullah. This is a very serious subject because the easiest thing for a human being is to be an extremist. And when I mean by extremist, there's always two sides of everything. And one side, those who are one side, they would call people those who are on the other side as extremists, and vice versa. And what is right is usually the middle between these two extremes. And one of the miraculous things about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is always the middle between two extremes. And this is what you referred to in the verse, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. This is how we made you a just nation. And that's what is meant by the middle. That is to be just. Just between two wrongdoings or two injustices. And this is something when people, the more they gain knowledge about the deen of Islam, in matters of belief, it's very clear. It's matters of ibadah, matters of transactions, livelihood matters, relationships. You would find the perfect balance in life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to observe, and we have that perfect balance in the life and the actions of the Prophet ﷺ as a role model, as an example to all mankind. And then when people try to apply this, the desires comes in place, lack of knowledge, whatever reasons, people might fall into one extreme or the other. That's why we need to always correct ourselves to be upon this middle course, the just way, which is the way of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not the just way that everybody claims to be, that we are the middle way, we are the just way, referring to their own desires. So if 5 times salah is too difficult for someone, makes them lose their job, for example, they would say the middle course, the middle way is to just pray 3 prayers a day. If khamr, drinking wine intoxications, would ruin some tourist industry or makes a person not following his desires, he says the middle way is that maybe just a little bit every day. So human beings, everything is relative to them. So what is the absolute truth? This is the middle course, and that is the only way for people to know that is by the wahy revelation from Allah, the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is his speech and actions. And this by itself can be really a series in which we examine and we look into everything. Matters of belief, matters of ibadah, matters of livelihood, things, always the middle course between two extremes. And even within the ummah of the Muslims, there is the people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They are in the middle course with all of these extreme sects. And there is extremism within the religion of Islam, as there is extremism within Christianity and Judaism, which is extremism that means it's evil. It's deviation from the true path, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And people can claim to be Muslims and so on, but they fall into extremes. And that's why within matters of belief, there's the people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the midst of all of these different extremes. So it's a duty for a Muslim to be a Muslim, and then to be upon the middle way, which is the way of the Prophet ﷺ, is not what people like or what people are pleased with, is according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ.
So there was a hadith, like a saying or an incident that happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that one of the companions, that his wife was complaining about that he doesn't maybe stay with her, and he prays all night and he recites the Quran and so on. And of course when she said this, that was a complaint, because he didn't have balance in other things, and the Prophet told him some teachings and some things that we want to benefit from. What are these things?
Now this actually happened more than one time at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, with the revelation from Allah, with the importance of the hearts being attached to the hereafter, with the orders from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to worship Him alone. So the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they loved this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purified the hearts in which their joy was in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet ﷺ would have to teach them not to fall into the extremism in matters of worship and not fulfilling the rights of others in our life. So therefore, more than one time at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, one of which this companion like Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, and Abdullah ibn Umar the same way, where they get into these types of extremism in which it would undermine the rights of their wives. In this case, with the entire night, Abdullah ibn Umar, when he got married, the entire night was in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he did not approach his wife. This devotion, level of devotion, that was a beautiful thing in him, but the Prophet ﷺ corrected him. And that's why he said the very, very famous statement, and it was said to Abu Darda radiallahu anh, when the Prophet ﷺ made him and Salman al-Farisi as brothers when they migrated to Al-Madinah. And when he spent the night with him, he found him from the beginning of the night getting up to pray. So Salman radiallahu anh told him, sleep. So he slept, and then he wanted to wake up again. He said, sleep. Till the last part of the night, he told him, when he got up, he allowed him, and he prayed. And then when the Prophet ﷺ was told about this, he said to him, إِنَّ لِبَدَنِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا وَلِزَوْجِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا وَلِضَيْفِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, and so on, which means you have rights on your own self, your own body has a right on you, your wife has a right on you, your children have a right on you, your guests have a right on you. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَأَعْطِ كُلَّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقًّا, give everyone his rights. And this is the balance that a Muslim should be upon. So when a person has a guest, what is the right that needs to be observed now is to take care of the guest. This might take the person away from something else that he was doing. Because a Muslim, really, if a Muslim understands his religion, there's no free time in our life. Really, life is a very serious one, and we should be constantly busy. There's so many different rights in our lives, as is mentioned in this hadith. A person, there's rights of the parents, rights of the children, if a person is married, the rights of the wife or the rights of the husband, rights of the neighbors, the rights of relatives. The rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes before all of this. 5 daily prayers and so on, seeking provisions, and many different things in our life in which disbelievers or people that follow their desires, they don't care about all of these things. They have only one thing, which is their own desires. So work, for example. So they would work from 8 to 8. It doesn't matter to them. Rights of the family, sometimes many people, they belittle this. What family? Even to the extent of which their own parents, they don't care about them, throw them in a nursing home, and they don't care about their parents and things of that nature. Wives and husbands, everything is greedy with their own desires and so on. This is not the case in the deen of Islam.
And does that mean, Shaykh Ibrahim, the balance here must be like distributed equally, like for everything mentioned in the hadith, or there's some things that they have more priority?
It's not about matters being equally, but to be done in a just way. So, for example, what is the rights towards the wife? Whether it's the obligations with financially and physically and so on, and giving some time, in one's life, and the goodness, and that's if there's a problem or an issue, then of course they have rights more than anyone else. The same thing with the children too, for the upbringing of the children in a balanced way. If there's parents, then there's also time to be given, and it's not just about time, time and concern and financially certain rights and so on, and neighbors, and so all of this is done in a balanced way, that a person does not spend his entire life or entire day doing one thing and one thing only, whether it's ibadah or whether it's work. Because when we talk about extremism or not having the balance in time in life, people sometimes they refer to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that talks about the ibadah, which we all agree that this is something that should be balanced. But what about a person working 12 hours a day? It becomes the norm of the life of the people. And that's extremism. Where in the world that a person would give rights to others in his life? Some people, they complain that they don't get to see or to sit even with their children. They leave early morning when the children are asleep, and they come back at night when they're asleep, and they don't get to see them.
So what if they say, Shaykh Ibrahim, that this is a necessity, we cannot live except if we work all of these hours? It's a necessity. They work as far away, and this is the only work that I have, and so on.
Right. Necessities are usually exceptions. It does not become the norm. When it's the norm, this is why when the Muslims are really weak and oppressed, this is what happens. Because the way that the work environment, for example, nowadays, has no respect whatsoever, for example, to the obligatory salah of a Muslim. If Muslims, they have the means, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a long time between Fajr and Dhuhr time, as an example. And again, not everybody would work just between Dhuhr or Fajr and Dhuhr. But there is the necessity of fulfilling the rights of others. Who said that the rights of the children is to feed them only. You know, and sometimes there's exaggeration in matters of this is the only way. Why? Because a person wants to put himself in a specific level of richness or in the society and so on, and undermining the rights of his children. For a person to sit with his family and to teach his children with his actions, and they get to know each other, right, is more priority than having a lot of money and to feed them. And at the end, what's the goal of raising the children or having family? Is to make them healthy and financially well, and then they enter the hellfire. The goal is to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. O you who believe, shield yourself and your families, a blazing fire. So this is something that a person has to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to really see what the options are. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to quit today, but people have to see the options in their life, and sometimes to choose a lesser lifestyle, but for the benefit of being kind and to fulfill the rights in our life, rather than just being someone that just brings money and neglects his family. Many people, they travel for many months, and they ignore their family. And what happens, we know the outcome of it. Children are raised in such a tribulation, basically, the life that we live in, and as a result of that, they lose their religion.
Very beautiful, Sheikh Ibrahim. After the break, we're going to talk about the it's very known notion between some of the Muslims. They say, this is 1 hour for your Lord and 1 hour for your heart. So we'd like to know how to respond to this. So dear brothers and sisters, we're going to meet after the break. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters. We're talking about balance in Islam. We're talking about a very well-known notion between some of the Muslims and some of the Arabs especially. They say that 1 hour for your heart, 1 hour for your Lord. We would like to know, is this correct in Islam or not? So we'd like to know this, Sheikh Ibrahim.
This is actually, there was a statement by the Prophet ﷺ that was taken out of context. And taking things out of context is a form of extremism. And that what leads people to extremism is this taking things out of context. No extremist would come from nowhere. There's always evidences are backing up this extremism, but it's taken out of context. And one of which is the speech versus actions. How the Prophet ﷺ understood what he said. How the companions radiallahu anhum understood the statements of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a mandatory understanding for everybody to understand. So this was the Prophet ﷺ, when Hanzala, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, he felt that he has two attitudes. When he was with the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ reminded them of the hereafter as if they see the Jannah and the hellfire. So their iman is very high and they find themselves very spiritually and so on. They go back to the family, he plays with his family, with his wife and children, and he feels that he is a hypocrite like this. When he has these two different feelings, as a feel of forgetfulness versus the feel of being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he was concerned about this, and he met Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he expressed to him what he feels. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, I have the same feeling. And Hanzala, he said a very serious statement. He said, Nafaqa Hanzala. Hanzala became a hypocrite because of these two different feelings or two different attitudes that he has. So they went to the Prophet ﷺ to ask him. So when they said that to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ approved these two feelings. And he said, if you are the same way you are with me, to be with your families, the angels will shake your hands on the roads. That means there is no unseen anymore. Being a human is okay to be human. That means to fulfill your desires. To have moments of not forgetfulness in the negative sense, but you're being a human, you're taking care of your needs, your desires, you have your family, you have moments of enjoyment and so on. And it doesn't have to be moments of devotion and worship and standing in salah and so on. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Hanzala, sa'a wa sa'a. This is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. O Hanzala, 1 hour and 1 hour. So what is understood from this context? That 1 hour for your worship of Allah, and it's a very serious hour, and 1 hour for the necessities of your life and the permissible acts in your life, to do it and to enjoy it, and there's no harm as long as it helps you to fulfill the other hour, because the first hour is the goal of life. So if a person has this balance, he will have the happiness of this life and in the hereafter.
So it's a matter of intention.
A matter of intention and actions. Because if it's understood to be 1 hour for the worship of Allah and 1 hour for sins and disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is contradiction. That means a person is just building and destroying, building and destroying. but rather building and keep on building with the worship of Allah, and the worship of Allah by doing the things that are permissible, enjoying life in the permissible way. This is by itself is a positive attitude. If a person is enjoyment, entertainment in this life, really there's no exaggeration if we say the norm of it is haram. You know, it's sinful. So if a person chooses to stay away from what is haram and enjoy what is permissible, and in some situations, in some countries, in some times, it becomes very strict. A person can't find really the many alternatives of halal, permissible means for a person to enjoy. This attitude by itself is a virtuous thing. A person get rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore really with even the times that we live in today, the most enjoyable individuals on the face of earth, those who are righteous, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them really the real enjoyment of things in the halal way.
SubhanAllah. So we'd like to know, Shaykh Ibrahim, the difference between Christians and Jews, of course after the distortion of the message, that we hear that the Jews, they take the more physical part of the religion, and the Christians, they take the more spiritual part, and that's why you can have like sort of, there's something lacking for both of them. And in the Quran, like Allah tells us, like in a metaphor, in one of the verses in the Quran, that we are in the middle, like between both of them. Like if they look at us from the side of the spiritual way, they see it. And if we look at us from the physical way, they see us too.
Right. Every single beautiful aspect that was mentioned in the previous prophets, Musa alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, whatever, in physical acts of worship and so on, you would find it in the deen of Islam. And every perfect meanings of spirituality and purification of the soul and so on, that was to the messengers before, like Isa alayhi salam and so on, you would find it perfectly in the deen of Islam, and this is the balance. That therefore, what lacks to many of the people of Bani Israel is this harshness and the hardness of their hearts. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Isa alayhi salam, Jesus the son of Mary, to soften this. And this is perfectly mentioned in the deen of Islam. And the same thing with the spirituality that might lead the person astray by being ignorant about matters of religion and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from the person, falling into extremism, going against human nature, like being, refusing or not getting married, or making what's permissible forbidden, whatever there is, that's against human nature. So this is something that you would find it forbidden in the deen of Islam, and giving the real nourishment of the soul with things that purifies the soul, with physical actions and non-physical actions. That's why for a person sincerely looking into seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, you would find this perfect balance in the deen of Islam.
So can we say, is it fair, like the Judaism, when it was distorted, it became more materialistic? It depends on, like, we want to see God, we want to see the signs, and that's it. And something like of the verses, they actually told the Prophet ﷺ, like we want to see fire coming from the sky and so on.
Right, and this is something very clear of how this harshness of the heart, and they would ask these types of questions to the prophets of Allah, and becomes very materialistic in the sense that the hearts become hard, that the person would know the truth and turn away from it, and intentionally change the truth and deviate from the true message. This is the outcome of a heart being harsh and hard. On the other hand, people do not know the truth. They neglect knowledge, and rather they would think that they have the means to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with oppressing their own desires in a way they think this is the way to please Allah. They looked at the religion from the aspect of some form of sacrifice. You have to sacrifice. So this is how they looked at the religion. They thought that this is what pleases Allah, is just to sacrifice, whether the sacrifice is justified or not. And this is not the case. The truth is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. He knows us more than we know our own selves. So there is a level of sacrifice, and there is a level of enjoying materialistic things in this life. When a person enjoy it for the sake of Allah, this is also against one's desire. A religious person, someone that is devoted in worship, it's against his desire that he would take time out to take care of the physical needs of his family, to go purchase food for them, for example. Right? It's against his desire. He is enjoying so much the devotion in his worship. So being a slave of Allah, then he would go against his own religious desire to do the norm that people like in this life. Someone worked on himself so much and years of struggling with his own self, he really becomes very strong when it comes to his own nature. These three people that went to the house of the Prophet ﷺ and they asked about the worship of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, فَكَنَّهُمْ تَقَلُّوا, they belittled it. And one of them, he said, as for me, I would fast every day. This is a strong person. And the other one said, and as for myself, I would never marry women. And the third one, as for myself, I would never sleep at night. These are very strong personalities that they can control themselves to stay up all night standing in salah. This is not a very easy thing. To fast every day in one's life, to be away from fulfillment of one's desire. What the Prophet ﷺ did when he heard about these people, he got so angry ﷺ, and he said, as for me, I sleep and I wake up for the salah, I fast and I break my fast and I marry women. And this is my way, and whoever turn away from my way, he's not one of me. He does not belong to me. And this is the balance, but it's a balance also against those who desire to be righteous and religious. And this is the perfect balance in the deen of
Beautifully said, Sheikh Ibrahim. So what about we have two hadith, like some of the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, he's telling us, in one of the hadith, that life is cursed. And another one, life is sweet. So we'd like to understand both of them together and the context of these hadith.
No. The hadith that talks about the dunya mal'una ma'umna fiha, that the dunya, this worldly life, is cursed, and whatever in it is cursed, illa dhikrullah ma wala, except the remembrance of Allah and what helps to establish the remembrance of Allah. So within this hadith, before even we talk about that the dunya is sweet and green, this hadith by itself is sufficient. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, it's all cursed except the dhikr of Allah, the remembrance of Allah, the purpose of life, which is the worship of Allah, and what helps the person to establish this remembrance of Allah. The second part, what does it mean? A person needs to eat to be able to make the worship of Allah. If a person is hungry, he won't be able to make salah, he won't make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that means a person has to seek provisions. So this comes with the matter of work and seeking provisions and so on, and eating and so on. A person has to have relationships. A person has to get married. He has to have children. He has to take care of them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to establish the dhikr of Allah. So there are things that are done that is not necessarily a specific or direct dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that helps the person to make the dhikr of Allah. So therefore a person would have a family, would have a car, would have a job, would have relationships, will eat good food that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it permissible by staying away from what is haram. So you'd find life is well balanced and the hadith is fulfilled perfectly. So what is cursed here is what takes the person away from the dhikr of Allah. Anything that takes the person away from the remembrance of Allah becomes cursed in his life. And a person would regret it in the day of judgment. Whether it's clean haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade it, neglecting the salah, intoxications and so on, or something that is originally halal, but it takes the person away from the remembrance of Allah. A wife or a husband that takes the person away from the obligatory salah, that are cursed for him. One's job that is halal, perfectly halal, but takes the person away from fulfilling the rights of his parents, the rights of his family and so on, it's a cursed thing for him, because it will become a source of punishment for him in the hereafter, unless he repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the balance in which a Muslim would see, like Surah Al-Asr, every single human being is in loss except those who believe and do righteous good deeds and enjoying what is patience and enjoying the truth.
Very beautiful, Sheikh Ibrahim. Thank you so much. Really benefited from what you said, Sheikh Ibrahim, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you, dear brothers and sisters, for joining us, and until next time, stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.